contradicts Christian doctrine. I will also now explain why morality based upon the God of the Bible is dangerous and inferior to a secular humanist morality. Dr. Craig and others assert that Christianity provides a superior basis for morality than the secular humanism. However, since the Christianity that Dr. Craig defends is a Bible-based religion, we have to look to the behavior of the biblical God to see if that God is moral. In the Bible, God orders the killing of whole tribes of people, including the killing of innocent people and innocent children and infants. On June 15th of 1998, in Dr. Craig's debate against Professor Keith Parsons in Dallas, Texas, I heard Dr. Craig say that since God gave life to the people he ordered to be killed in the Bible, it was okay for him to take those lives. It was not God, remember, who killed these people directly, but ordered others to carry out the slaughter. And yet Dr. Craig justified that in his debate with Dr. Parsons. Does this mean that Dr. Craig would justify it if some group of believers today started to kill off non-believers, claiming a command from God? If Dr. Craig protests and says he would not justify such killing, why does he justify what the people, supposedly acting on God's orders, did in biblical times? If Dr. Craig says that God used to order people to kill others in biblical times, but no longer does so, we must ask, on what basis can we be sure that God ever gave direct orders to kill off whole tribes of people in ancient times, but no longer directs his followers to kill off people today? If Dr. Craig takes this position, it means he is admitting that all sorts of direct communication from God, including direct orders to kill, such as Samuel delivered to King Saul, occurred only during biblical times. This again raises the specter of why we had miracles back then, but we moderns are denied them today. So we can see that secular humanist morals based on love of humankind is far superior to morals based on Christian love for the biblical God. In this type of Christian love, it is permissible for people to be killed on God's whim just because he is deemed, this God, to be the creator of all of us. On the secular humanist view, it is not permissible for any person to be killed, regardless of whether some powerful invisible force commands it or not. The Bible is so filled with atrocities that we cannot possibly root even any agreed upon objective basis for morality in it. Yet Dr. Craig says that the loftiest of morals have no stable foundation without the God of the Bible. He also repeatedly said, and has said, there is no reliable basis to condemn outrages like rape in a universe without his biblical God. Well, as I will later point out, the biblical God has condoned rape. Yet, if there are such things as objective moral values, no one more egregiously violates those standards than the God of the Bible. The amount and nature of evil in the world also makes the existence of an all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing God highly unlikely. If God is all-powerful, he could certainly have created a world with less evil and less calamity. He could have given us a world that is more climatically stable, with less floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, fewer hurricanes. He could have created a world without tobacco. He could have made the avocado pit smaller. If God loves humanity like he's supposed to, then he could certainly lessen the amount of suffering on this earth. The Bible portrays God as a being who can make anything happen that he wants to happen. This is set forth in Isaiah 46:9-11 and Ephesians 1:11. Thus God could figure out a way for humanity to grow and develop without undergoing the enormous amount of suffering we endure. The news is replete with stories of innocent young children killed by stray bullets, innocent young children maimed and butchered all over the world, innocent people maimed and killed by natural disasters as well as by human-fomented people. In his debate against Professor Ted Drange, Dr. Craig argued that some of the most egregious of atrocities have resulted in people coming to know God, and thus the earthly trauma was worth it because it led to eternal salvation. Well, the Holocaust did not result in the surviving Jews coming to know Jesus in any greater numbers, and thus if the Holocaust were meant to be a catalyst to get the traumatized survivors of the concentration camps to come to Jesus, it didn't have such an effect. Being omniscient, couldn't God have seen that this wouldn't work in case of the Jews, and thus spared them the trauma of the Holocaust? If suffering is a warning from God, God should explain how and why, and be clear about the warning and what it's for. In a dream or a religious experience, God should say to somebody, you know, I let that stray bullet blow your 3-year-old daughter's head off last night because I wanted to send you a message that your inside stock trading deals are completely immoral and totally unfair to your partners. Or God could reverberate a voice throughout the house of someone and say, your beautiful young spouse has just been drowned in a swimming accident, so that you will stop your awful software copyright infringements, rather than remaining silent. Now, why is Bangladesh, for instance, singled out as a place of such immense suffering rather than Beverly Hills or here in Malibu? Why does one soul get to come to earth in a body in a Brentwood mansion, and the other soul is consigned to enter the world in a mud hut in places like Bangladesh? If you want to say that God is rewarding countries where Christianity dominates, then why did God allow the greatest and richest oil reserves to be in Saudi Arabia, a country which is hostile to Christianity and even prohibits Christian evangelizing? Some Christians have argued that sometimes evil brings about great human qualities such as the exercise of compassion. But the exercise of compassion would be consistent with far less evil if this all-knowing, omnipotent God had given humans superior empathetic abilities. It has been argued that helping the suffering is a great good, and that thus suffering is necessary in order for others to have people to help. But then why are some people located in remote areas or in sometimes very comfortable areas in which they are not given adequate opportunity to learn about great suffering, which their intervention might help to ease? My mother, an Auschwitz survivor, was shattered by her experience and by being forced to shovel the ashes of her father and brother after they were gassed and burned at Auschwitz. The psychological problem that she developed and her other difficulties were enormous. There were no improvements in her character or willpower from this experience. It only made her weaker, more afraid, and feeling more hopeless about life. Is someone not going to argue that God had this hidden purpose to make her experience Auschwitz and be so broken afterwards, so that I, her son, after spending most of my childhood observing her and hearing about her horrible experiences, would grow up to be a major atheist activist? Is that one of God's hidden purposes? Now, the strong likelihood that death is the end of our conscious existence makes Christianity implausible. Now, it may be nice to someday float through heavenly spheres of great joy, but what we know about the dependence of self-awareness on the physical brain makes the possibility of conscious survival of death highly unlikely. We come to acquire all knowledge through our brains as we go through the tedious process of growing and learning over a span of years. At the age of 2 weeks old, none of us has the type of conscious self-awareness that we would wish to hold on to for eternity. Thus, if a 2-week-old baby or a 3-year-old child dies, does that child suddenly reconstitute in the hereafter as a fully formed person, speaking a complete language and thinking complete adult thoughts? We know our thoughts and our ideas by the language we speak. That language is learned entirely through sensory input into our brains. If you take a newborn who is completely deaf and completely blind and further situate that person on a remote island without ever having any human contact other than being fed and housed, in such a way so as to avoid climactic discomforts, that person, regardless of how long he or she lives in such a condition, will never develop any level of consciousness or thought process or understanding that would be even minimally cognizable to us as meaningful awareness. If such a person dies after some 7 years in this state, will they appear in the hereafter, now able to hear, see, and speak a language in which they can communicate ideas, the same as a person who has had a full life in the physical body with all sensory conduits to the brain completely functioning? Will such a person magically now have a meaningful level of consciousness so as to be able to enjoy eternity and understand the glory of the afterlife? The same as one of us who had developed our minds in the normal pattern of studying, learning, by way of sensory input into our brains? If even a blow to the head or Alzheimer's disease can eclipse consciousness, how much more can consciousness be annihilated by the total destruction of the brain? If a 2-year-old child is rendered a human vegetable by severe brain damage and exists in that state for 60 years and then dies, does that person all of a sudden appear in full awareness in the hereafter? The same as if that individual had undergone a full life's experiences? In his debate with Professor Doug Jessup, Dr. Craig said that non-physical entities can influence physical events, such as his mind willing his arm to raise.